Welcome to Conversations of Hope, shining light on the journey of healing from abuse and trauma. I'm Faith Ingram of Speaking Truth in Love Ministries.
And I'm Michelle Viscuse from Journey Pink. As survivors and advocates, we're here to support, educate, and inspire. Whether you're a survivor of abuse, a friend, family member, or a professional working with survivors, this podcast is for you.
We're breaking the silence that allows abuse to thrive, offering insights for healing and tools for effective support.
Our goal is to create a safe community of understanding, healing, and hope for survivors and their allies.
Visit conversationsofhopepodcast.org for resources and more information. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Hello, everybody. Today we're going to continue our conversation with Lizzie Hershberger. Lizzie is an author and an advocate and a speaker. She shares her experience as a former member of the Amish community, and she focuses on bringing to light the issues of abuse and the challenges faced by women in closed communities. Lizzie is a powerful voice for change. She wrote her memoirs in the book Behind Blue Curtains, and she inspires others to speak out and seek justice. Lizzie continues to advocate for survivors and educates the public as an expert on the complexities of life within the Amish culture.
Thank you, Faith and Michelle, for having me on to continue our conversation.
Yes, we're so happy that we can take this time with you. We just talked about you writing a book, and can you tell me a little bit about the process of writing your memoirs and how that maybe helped you in your healing journey, or was it more complicated?
Yes. I started writing my book thinking that it probably might never get published. I just wanted to write things down that happened to me. And I also wanted my children to be able to kind of know more of my story. I hadn't necessarily shared with them everything that had happened with me. And also I wanted it written down because I wanted to find my biological father. That is another part of my story that I had never really publicly talked about, is that I unfortunately found out at the age of 26, the DNA test, that the dad that raised me, I grew up with, that he was not my biological father. I believe I was a young teenager when somebody shared with me that they do not believe that his name is Levi Hershberger, that he's not your dad. And I didn't know what they were talking about. Yet I always knew that I was different. I knew that I didn't look like my sister. I didn't look like my brothers. I didn't look like my grandparents. I always felt different. Now, whether that was because of some of the things that I was experiencing, abuse and things, or whether it was because I really was not who they told me I was, I realized after having children that it's not just about me. My children deserve to know who their grandpa is too. But at 26, my dad was still living, and I decided to wait and do my pursuit of finding my biological father later in life. So sometime after he passed away, I decided to pursue this, and I am still, unfortunately, looking for my biological father to come forward. I do believe I know who he is. I believe I have siblings, but he has not chosen to take a DNA. I talk about it in my book, at the process of having taken multiple DNA tests with different people that my mom or my dad even told me that could possibly be my father. So really, the book was written out of wanting my children to know who their mother really was and who maybe their grandpa was. And so I just continued writing. And then eventually I did find somebody to help me put some things together, because when I was first writing, I mean, my book is all over the place. You just write things down. It's more almost like it was like journaling, and then putting everything together was quite challenging, and I needed some help. But what happened with that was then that's when I also decided that I need to come forward. So it's all just such a journey. And like I
Yeah.
said, not everybody chooses to publish it. I decided to, and I am so glad I did, because it has helped me along my journey and encouraging others to come.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah. And your book does speak to people that have gone through very similar circumstances and makes them feel like they're not alone. There are other people that have had similar things that have happened to them, and those people have come out the other side, and they're encouraged that there's hope through the journey and through the process. Even though the process is hard, there is hope that things do get better.
There were times when I wrote things where I would actually get extremely ill and I would have to stop the writing process. I would just stop. I would put my writing things away for 6 months and I wouldn't even do it anymore. It's too hard. But
Mhm.
then yet I would come back and I would write again and discover more things. And sometimes it was just things I had totally blocked out. I will say that um, I never anticipated the book to be doing as well as it did. I published it 3.5 years ago. So it's been a while and it's on Amazon and there's quite a few bookstores that do carry it also. But one of the things I will share is that I do get a little bit of backlash sometimes on it because in the middle of the book, I have, if I can find out, I have put some pictures. And one that is one of probably the biggest things that I get is people ask me why I chose to put some pictures in. And I did actually have the DNA test in there because I wanted people to know that it was authentic, I guess, and that I had some information. It wasn't just hearsay. I mean, yes, it is saying I remember it the way I remember it. And I tried to minimally have things of my mom or my dad in or my siblings because it's my journey, it's my experience. I'm always shocked when I hear somebody, especially from my community, that will either ask me for a copy of my book or cousins, they'll message me. And I always say that anybody whom I like, my cousins or any distant relatives that want to read my story and don't have access to get it on Amazon or something, they can contact me and I can share a book with them.
Yeah, the process of writing takes time and it evolves. It took me 10 years to write my story. And I started when I was 40 and I published it when I was 50. And what I originally had written and thought my book was going to be, it changed completely 2 or 3 years prior to releasing it. Started over at page 1. But I think you have to get it all out. That's the thing. Like I had details in the first draft that I started. It was more of this is the story. But when I rewrote it, starting from page 1, it was this is the healing journey. And there was some reflection back on parts of the story, but not the entire piece of the story. But again, it's the process of getting it all out that's so helpful because, and I think the reason writing is so powerful is because our voices have been taken. It was hard for me to get my voice back. So in the beginning, I didn't even have words sometimes for what I wanted to say, but I could write it. And so I remember days of going back to work and just closing the door and opening the computer and just banging on the keyboard like I had to get it out. And the keyboard was a safe place. It didn't doubt me. It didn't question, why haven't you told me this sooner? So the keyboard was like a companion. What would you say like to listeners who have a story and they've thought about writing it? What would you say to them on how to get started or what that might look like?
Thank you. That is a good question. And I have gotten that question before. And I tell them, just start writing. Um, and don't worry about, you don't edit yourself. You don't try to figure out what chapter, where it goes. You just write if you are wanting it for the healing process. And don't rush yourself and don't put a time on it. I've had so many people say, well, I've told people I'm going to have a book out in a year. Yes, some people can, but I don't suggest it. I'd say, that's just if you want to take your time and go through some healing and different layers, and you'll remember things that you had forgot. And I went back and like researched some things and went through my mom's journal and different things. So to anybody that wants to write a book, please just don't limit yourself to a certain length of time. Just take your time. I hand wrote a lot of my stuff. So then eventually, you have to type it up. That is a longer process. But if you're skilled at, banging around on the keyboard, that's what you do. Do whatever it takes to just get your thoughts and things out. And I think the journey is so worth it. And so much of it is a process. And and I just hope people don't compare themselves to
Uh-huh.
somebody, because I've heard people say, well, I published a book in a year. And I say, well, good for you. I did.
Right.
And if you want your book also the quality of it, you can get it out there quicker. But a really good quality book takes multiple editors. I worked on it for so long, I had to have somebody else then eventually look at it and read it, because you've worked on your own words for so long. It's like you need a new set of
Mhm.
eyes. I'm very grateful. It was, there's different ways people can also publish. You can go self publishing, or, all kinds of going with a publisher. But I don't think people should rush the process and just enjoy the journey.
And you mentioned that you had to take breaks in that process, and that's important too. And on our Prime Talk, you talked about self care. I think that's kind of connected. So you would have to take breaks. And a lot of that is part of self care. So can you tell us a little bit about the self care that you use?
Yes, I have found nature, plants, and things like that really do well for me for self care. And in the summertime, I have lots and lots of plants outside. And in the wintertime, many plants move in with me into the habit. And then I'm working with my plants, and um, it's nurturing to me. Also, the other thing I do is I definitely daily um, you have time to just have a little bit of time to yourself, because we can get so busy with our families or with our work, or in my case, advocacy work and things, that I forget that I need to fill myself up first before I can give to others. And um, so that's what I do. I fortunately live in the Midwest where it gets really cold during the winter. So that's why I just find different ways to bring self care. Yeah, even during the winter is definitely different, a little bit more challenging.
But self care is so important. And a lot of times we get the message that we shouldn't take care of ourselves, that we're supposed to be giving, 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 and doing, doing, doing. But as you said, if we don't take time for ourselves, we don't have that to give out. We need to fill up our bucket, so to speak, before we can give out. Otherwise, your bucket goes empty and you have nothing left to give. And then you're struggling just to survive.
Mhm.
And we want to be thriving. We don't just want to survive and make it through the day, but we do need time and just finding what you need to do self-care. And I know exercise and physical activity is part of that, and even going outdoors and enjoying nature, a lot of times that includes walking and just strolling through nature, and it's so healing. I think nature is healing, just to think of God's creation and how miraculous it is and how beautiful it is and how um it just gives you more life.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think that's a very, very good point. And for somebody you maybe like pets or there's other things, just find something that you can do. Some people, the exercise is so important to moving, and especially as we get older. My goodness, it's so important to do that.
And you mentioned that writing is part of that healing process and self-care as well. You know, writing and art. Conversations of Hope extends beyond this podcast. Michelle and I are available to speak at women's, youth, church, and community events.
We offer presentations on abuse prevention, healing, and empowerment.
To learn more about our speaking engagements and personal coaching and support services, visit our website, conversationsofhopepodcast.org.
Together, we can inspire change and promote healing in your community. I was going to say, you mentioned that you wanted your kids to know your story. And I think that's interesting because in the beginning, when all of this started coming up for me, I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want my husband to know. I didn't want my kids to know. But now I am so thankful that they know the story. And I think it gives them hope to know that God can bring you through things that are horrible. And thinking about how I wanted to not share that with them or not share that with my husband, and how that felt like it was the right thing to do, was to protect the secret. But 10 years later now, I'm so thankful that they see what God has done in my life and that they've been a witness to that journey. And so just for the listener who's thinking, like, I would never want my family to know what I went through, or I would never want my kids to know, that that's probably real for all of us. But on this side, you're so thankful that that legacy of healing and that legacy of hope is going to be in your child's life and in their children's life. It's going to go forward. So I just think it's interesting that you shared it from the perspective that you wanted them to know.
At the time, I don't know that I thought they were ready to know all of it, but I thought if I would write it down. And I should also explain, right when I started writing, I believe it was 2017, my daughter had left for college, was gone one day, and I was in a horrible ATV accident, where I ended up, for the first time ever, I ended up in a hospital for 39 days, and I had 16 surgeries to save my foot. And putting me flat on my back for the first time in my entire life, because all I ever did is just go, go, go. I realized I could have so easily, that could have been the end of my story. It gave me a different perspective. And that's why I think I also decided I want to write things down. My youngest was 14 when I published my book. And I remember somebody asking him in front of me if he's read it. And he said, I looked at the front and the back, and I decided that it's not for me yet. But I have older children that have read it. So I think it just gives you something to leave for your kids. And again, also going back to my biological father, it's not just about me or my mom not being truthful with me. My kids deserve to know. Eventually, hopefully, I'll be a grandmother, and then they deserve to know their heritage, and whether I will find that out in my lifetime. I'm sure that eventually it will come out. I think it's just something, and some people don't have kids. I always say, thank goodness I had kids, because they really did keep me going through all these years. Because I definitely struggled when I was hiding the secret of debilitating depression and, suicide and all kinds of things. But I had kids. I had kids, and I was like, there's no way I have to be here for my kids.
It is interesting that family does become part of who we are and why we do the things that we do, why we're passionate about stopping abuse, for one, because we want to protect those coming behind us. We want to stop this generational abuse that continues. I want my kids to have a better life than I had. At first, I didn't want to tell my kids what I had been through because we want them to think that, you know, God's a good God and bad things don't happen to Christians. But then because I went through abuse and I'm telling them that is, you know, the things that I was taught, that God's good, and the things I didn't that didn't make sense to me, I just left out of my story because I didn't want God to have a bad name, and it's like God can't stand up for himself,
Yes.
that type of thing. So, I I didn't want my kids to know because I wanted to protect them, but then they did need to know because they needed to know the full truth that you can't trust everyone, even people that you think you should be able to. So it's confusing sometimes what we should share with our families and what we believe that we need to keep hidden from them. And it's just, I guess it's something that a lot of people might be struggling with. Do I tell my kids? Do I
Right.
not tell my kids? Do I write it in a book? But I mean, I think that that's something, even as if you're not a survivor of abuse, sharing your story and writing it down as a legacy for your children later on, just so that they know, okay, this is what my grandmother was, and this is what she did, and this is what my grandfather did. It's just having that legacy for the future generations, I think would be so helpful.
Yeah. And thank you for bringing that up. I remember that my daughter, once she knew my story, she said, well, now this makes sense on why I was so overly protective of her,
Mhm.
why I didn't let her go to, I will even say it, my dad. I did not let her go with my husband to visit my dad without me. I didn't trust that my husband had the ability to, plus he didn't know that my whole entire story, that he was able to keep my daughter safe from my dad, because my dad was one of my abusers. Two, it really helped her understand. She said it makes so
Mhm.
much sense on why you were so overly protective. And hindsight, um, I'm glad she knows. Um, because I did want to leave a different legacy, and the generational curse. I call it a curse. It's been
Mhm.
in, especially in my, it happened for generations already. And somebody at some point, I just say, you have to say, it has to stop. You have to do, with God's help, everything that I can to stop it from happening to my children or my grandchildren. You don't want to share it with your children, I think, when they're too young. You have to find that right balance when they're older. I do encourage some people with very young children, um, and they're very sensitive. I encourage them have to read my book. It's a tough read. I mean, it's got some very tough topics in there, and if they feel like they can't read it, then please don't read it. Wait till your kids get older or you're in a better space, because it's not an easy read as far as talking about abuse. Now it is put in a very simple form because I wanted to make sure that anybody from a eighth grade education that could just easily pick it up and read it, as far as the language. it's not using large words, and it's not using any offensive. I don't go into great detail on certain topics because I don't want it to be triggering, but it could possibly be for some people.
Right. And in our prior interview, you mentioned going to the police. And I think that's fascinating because I had my public panic attack standing beside a policeman. So I am so terrified and was taught to be terrified of police. And so when you mentioned that you went, there was someone there in that moment who was an advocate that helped you from the minute you walked in, or did they get somebody for you?
They did get somebody, so I'll just briefly, but what actually happened, my children were going to a small school and I was a school board member. But one evening they had a presentation where they said the local sheriff and somebody else is coming in and they're talking about how to watch your children with the new technology. I mean, we're talking 10 years ago. And, putting safety blockers and things on your kids' phones so they don't see some of these internet things. And it was the detective. I met him in person um, and then I started following him on Facebook and certain things that he posted. And eventually I built trust up in him that he was a good person. And I felt comfortable. So the first time I went in, I actually just messaged him on Facebook, and he was actually running for a local sheriff at that time. And I just asked him if I could come in and I just want to share something. I didn't tell him anything. I wasn't sure what I was going to say. And when I went in, that's when he sat down, and it was kind of at the end of the day. And I could tell that he had no idea, like no idea what I was coming for. And that's when he said, okay, maybe we should just schedule another time that we could have the victim's advocate be there. And I didn't know what that was. So then 2 days later, we met at a different location where I went into a room with the detective and shared my story, but she was sitting on the outside of the room. And then as soon as I came out, we just processed things together. So I hope that kind of answers your question. And what I learned going through the advocacy volunteer training that I took is that this is very common. Even in domestic violence cases, survivors or victims often don't feel comfortable around an officer or somebody, but sometimes you can meet the correct person that gives off that they're a safe person. I realized that he was a safe person and that he would do what he could to help in the situation. Had I not met him in person at this technology thing, I would hope that I would have come to the eventually, go in and report it. But I don't know that. This is just my experience and then the unfortunate experience with the it really did involve a school teacher and a student with a very similar ages. So that was the triggering part for me.
So if a listener is thinking about going to the police, would you recommend that they get an advocate before they go? Like instead of walking in? I've just heard some sad stories of people walking in alone and coming out more hurt than they were when they went in. And so the fact that your person told you, let's get you an advocate, I think that's so important for listeners to know that that's even a possibility and that it's helpful.
Thank you, Michelle, for bringing that up. That is a very good point. I suggest that number one, yes, you don't just walk to the police station and just randomly ask to report your story. You actually do multiple things. Number one, you ask for the person who investigates. There's always in every county, even if it's a small county, there is somebody that has a detective or an investigator that has extra training in the sexual assault cases. So you ask for that person, number one. And even if they say that there isn't anybody, then you find the most qualified person. I guess I shouldn't say most small counties have somebody has extra training for that kind of thing. But the other thing you can do, like you said, Michelle, is do contact a organization, or somebody like me that has some advocacy training, and ask them to come with you to report your case. You can do that. Um, you can also in the county where you're going to, yes, if you call in and make an appointment. And I'm talking about cases that are years past. I mean, if something's going on currently with somebody, um, yourself, domestic violence or something like that, um, you you don't want to wait. But if it's in a case like mine, you make an appointment, and then what it happens is you have time to kind of prepare and yes, have an advocate there for you. And I do know that, especially in some smaller communities, there is no court appointed. They don't have an advocate there, but find one. I know there's a list. There's organizations that have people that are trained to help in this case. I've heard terrible cases of somebody going in, eh, and trying to share their story, and they get told, you know, even from a detective that, well, it's happened too long ago, there's nothing they can do. Or there's really, you have to come in here in person. You can't just make a report. And there's just all kinds of bad things that I've heard. So just find the right person. If there's a survivor listening, just find a safe person, find somebody that can help you. If you want to report your case, there's different steps that trained advocates can help and to get you prepared to go in and share your story.
And even if you don't have a trained advocate to start out with, at least find a trusted friend that goes with you, and then they can ask questions about, okay, where can we find an advocate, and find out what organizations are available in your state, in your county, that are victim advocates or victim helpers or whatever, so that at least have somebody that knows that you're going to go, that is actually going to pray with you, going to walk you through this until you find an advocate. Because I think it's so important to have that added support.
Yes. And also, I might add, I think almost for sure in every state, some counties are combined, but the volunteer services that I worked with have a hotline, and you can call in, and then you can, if you share with them, oftentimes they can, and that group can go with you to, if you want to make a report or if you need to go to the hospital. So I was just never aware of all these. There are a lot of resources out there for survivors. And often, if you don't know where to go on a national level, there's a number, and they can filter you down into your local county,
Right.
local crisis. There's crisis lines and things like that. Find somebody, and like you said, Faith, if it's nothing else, find a safe person to go with, and you can process things, talk things over when you're having a tough time dealing and understanding some of the things.
We really appreciate your continuing to share with us, Lizzie, and you've shared a wealth of information from your experience, and I'm sure that our listeners will benefit from hearing your talks.
Thank you very much. I hope so. And I just thank you both again for what you're doing. And Conversations of Hope is just a wonderful platform.
Thank you.
Thank you. We hope this episode of Conversations of Hope has been a source of comfort and inspiration.
Remember, you are not alone on this journey of healing.
Visit conversationsofhopepodcast.org for more resources and information.
Please subscribe or follow and share with those who might need this message of hope. Until next time, keep hope alive.